Welcome to Hire Power, the show where we cut through the noise and get real about hiring. I'm Kim Frost, founder of Frost Connections, and after 25 plus years in the search industry, I've seen what works and what absolutely doesn't. If you're a founder, CEO, VP, or HR leader who's tired of bad hires and ready to build a team that actually fits your culture and vision, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Hire Power. So I've been reading a lot about friendships at work, and it's really been on my mind. And true to form, I'm going to speak the truth, and I know it's going to ruffle a few feathers. So I've read on Harvard Business Review, and if you scroll on LinkedIn long enough, you're going to see articles telling you that having friends at work boosts engagement, productivity, retention, all the good things. And while I understand the research, I am going to respectfully disagree, or at least heavily caution it, because I've seen the other side and it's not pretty. And I also want to be sure that I'm clear because there's a big difference in building trust by sharing some of who you are personally than an actual friendship. So here's a line that I have lived by: business is business and personal is personal. Early in my career, one of my BFFs said this to me: don't kid yourself. At the end of the day, as much as someone may like you, they may have to make a decision that impacts your personal relationship. Or worse yet, you have a personal disagreement. So you're the boss, right? There's a promotion, there's a restructuring. You've got to talk about compensation. There's a performance issue, there's layoffs, termination. You think that won't hit differently if that person is your friend? It will. And here's the part people don't talk about: you feel guilt, they feel betrayed. And suddenly, what was friendship becomes complicated, emotional, and messy. So here's when it backfires. And I'm going to share something that happened with me. I had a colleague who I genuinely thought was a friend. We worked together closely. We were peers. I didn't report to her. She didn't report to me. But we confided in each other. We did lunches, happy hours. We got together on weekends. We went out, the whole thing. Then we had a disagreement, part work, part personal. The lines were blurred. And instead of handling it professionally, she got upset. And what did she do? She dished and she dished and she dished. It was really embarrassing, honestly, mainly for her. And you know what? She ended up getting fired. But here's the part that people don't realize. Even when you win, and I'm air quoting that win there, you don't really win. My job became miserable. People looked at me differently. I could feel it. I never asked what was said. I didn't care. I didn't want to bottom feed. I didn't want to play the game. But things changed. I eventually left. Once something is said, you can't hear it. And you know, this whole experience, it was 30 years ago. Clearly, that experience has shaped me. Don't confuse proximity with friendship. I know you spend more waking hours with your colleagues than most anyone else in your life. That proximity creates familiarity. Familiarity can create connection. Connection can feel like a friendship, but don't confuse that proximity with true friendship. Yes, you are going to gravitate towards certain people, and you're going to do lunches and you're going to do happy hours. Definitely be friendly, but please draw a line, because the second something personal collides with something professional, it changes the chemistry. Okay, so let's talk about one of my favorites: alcohol and oversharing. You're at a team happy hour. You've had a couple of drinks, maybe one too many. You divulge something personal, something political, something emotional, something about your marriage, your finances, your frustration with leadership, or
Your colleague shares something you deeply disagree with. So you mean to tell me that's not going to impact you when you get to work on Monday? Of course it will, because again, you can't unhear things. There is a level of vulnerability that builds trust, owning mistakes, being accountable, admitting when you drop the ball. That's healthy. But there's a difference between professional vulnerability and emotional oversharing. One builds trust, the other creates liability. Okay, I know what you're saying. But Kim, I've met my best friend at work, and I know a ton of people meet their spouses at work. Yes, I've met a ton of my besties now from my work. But here's the difference. Most of those friendships deepened after we stopped working together. When you leave a company, you get to decide, who do I actually want in my life? Who do I connect with outside of shared deadlines, outside of shared stresses, outside of shared incentives? That's when you find out if the friendship is real. Again, I have several people from my past who are true friends today. But that happened once we were no longer tied to our job. The dynamic shifted. It becomes cleaner, healthier, and honestly, it became deeper. And again, I know many people have met their spouses at work, but do you know one of the first things that happen after they come clean about their relationship to coworkers and the boss? One of them leaves the organization, probably because it's company policy, but they know it's the smarter thing to do. It's better in the long run. So, my clients, I face this in my own business. I adore so many of my clients. We talk about life, family, big decisions, stress, dreams. There's warmth, there's connection, but I never kid myself. They are my clients. If the market shifts, if budgets tighten, if strategies changes, they may make a decision that impacts me. Or I may have to make a recommendation they don't love. When the work ends, and if we both choose to stay connected, that's when friendship can grow. In fact, I'm in that exact situation right now. A former client, one of their leaders, we've become good friends. However, if they should hire my firm again during that engagement, there's got to be clear lines always. So, what about starting a business with friends or better yet, family? And so you're saying, oh my God, but we've been friends first. We've had this great idea. We started a company together because we shared values. Yes, absolutely, that happens. And sometimes it works out beautifully. But before you do this, you have to ask yourself, as the company grows, as skill sets require change, which is a huge one, as pressure increases, as money enters the equation, what is the likelihood you will always be aligned? You've heard all the stories. Friends starting businesses together and falling out. Even worse, family members building companies and never speaking again. I experienced this really early in my career, nothing of this magnitude, like way, 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 way back. I worked for a really large company, and my sister also worked there. We were in different departments. It was a huge organization, plenty of separation. But as all sisters do, when we got in a fight, guess what? It impacted our work. It made work miserable for a long time. And listen, she's still my sister. I love her deeply, but it proved something to me early in my career. Personal conflicts bleed into professional spaces, whether you want it or not. And here's the thing, you may have these clear expectations, you may be okay with it all, but are they? So let's talk about leadership. If you're a CEO, a founder, a manager, and your direct reports are your friends, you're setting yourself up for a very difficult moment someday because leadership requires objectivity and friendship requires loyalty. And those two don't always align. At some point, you're going to need to give hard feedback. You may have to pass this person over for a promotion. You may have to restructure their department. You may have to let them go. And if you've built the relationship on friendship instead of professional respect, you're going to hesitate or they're going to feel betrayed. And guess what? Neither is healthy. High performing teams don't require friendship, they require clarity. Does that ring a bell? They require trust. Yes, I've talked about that in a prior podcast. They need accountability. You need respect. You can absolutely have camaraderie and you can absolutely like the people on your team. You should have that psychological safety. You should enjoy working together. But that is not the same as being besties. Building trust, sharing appropriately is very different than a friendship. So here's the balance. And let me be clear, I am not advocating for cold, robotic workplaces. We are all human. There is a level of vulnerability that builds trust. That's owning your mistakes, explaining your thought process, admitting when you're stretched, asking for help. That's leadership and that's maturity. But oversharing, emotional venting, dragging personal conflicts into work, this is where it goes sideways. So remember again, you can't unhear things and you cannot unknow things. Once that perception shifts, it's really hard to reset. And I talked about how to build trust in a prior episode. So check it out to hear the difference. So here's my stance. Absolutely be warm, be kind, be supportive, do lunches, happy hours responsibly. Build strong team dynamics. However, draw a line. Protect your professionalism. Protect your future self. Protect your leadership objectivity. Because when business decisions have to be made, and they will, you want them to stand on professional ground, not on emotional entanglement. I tell candidates all the time, as much as your boss may love you, respect you, value you, don't kid yourself. If they have to make a business decision, they will make a business decision. There are many companies that view themselves as family. They involve their families, which is beautiful. But again, they are still your boss or they are still your employees. Developing that warmth, that sense of belonging is so important, which is where it becomes tricky knowing where to draw that line. So here's the great news. You're going to meet incredible people along your career. And when seasons change, when roles shift, when companies part ways, you'll see who truly belongs in your life. That's when friendship becomes powerful. Not because you sit next to each other for 8 hours a day, but because you choose each other without the structure of workforce proximity. And that's real. My husband just left his company after 21 years. He truly loves so many people that he worked with and he met. And you know what? Now he gets to choose who he wants to continue to have that friendship with. So again, remember, business is business, personal is personal. Blur those lines carefully. Because as much as we want to believe relationships will always override reality, at work, decisions have consequences. And sometimes the cost of mixing the two is higher than you think. Thanks for joining me. If I've hit a nerve, I gotta say, good, right? Think about it over the weekend. Ask yourself, where are my lines? Are they clear? Because clarity, as we know, protects you, and clarity protects the people around you. Until next time.
That's it for this episode of Hire Power. If you're ready to hire smarter, connect with me at frostconnections.com or at LinkedIn at Kim Frost. And if you've got something to say about today's episode, follow the show and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, hire smart, lead better, and remember, how you hire is who you become. See you next week. No fluff, just better hires.